The problem is that there is always a lag, and the ME/CFS community has been wrong for many years because even though there was evidence, the doctors still not aware. The difference with the long COVID happened all at once to millions of people, and many people are at once developing the disease. So we see more attention at the NIH level, at the CDC level, the WHO.
Wow.
The problem is that the studies are happening like ours, COVID-UPP, and that will allow us to describe better how to recognize this condition. But the doctors in the practices that people are frequenting, they are not in tune with what's happening. They will learn about that in 5 years from now, and we need to care for people now.
Welcome to the Hope and Help podcast, where we talk about science and science-based tools for fatigue and chronic illness. I'm Haylie Pomroy, #1 New York Times bestselling author, and the Assistant Director of the Integrative Medicine Program here at the Institute of Neuro-Immune Medicine. Today, we're going to talk about long COVID, a subject that we have just been inundated, just flooded with questions from our community. So I chose two very special guests to help get you guys the answers that you are desiring and needing. Of course, we have Dr. Nancy Klimas. Dr. Klimas, thank you so much for being back with us again. Everybody, every time we do a podcast with you, we get hundreds of questions, thousands of emails. It's very, very unique that we have access to you. And so I just want to thank you so much for being here, Dr. Klimas.
Oh, you're welcome. And so I'm always happy to be here. And I love the kind of podcast where you answer questions. That's the perfect time.
It is good. And so we also wanted to pull in Dr. Ana Palacio. Dr. Palacio is the professor of clinical medicine at the University of Miami, and she's also the co-director of the long COVID clinic at the Miami VA. Dr. Palacio has 20 years of research experience in health disparities, and now she's also a co-PI, principal investigator, with Dr. Klimas for the COVID-UPP study. Dr. Palacio, thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is going to be a great conversation. We are in this very interesting trajectory in our health conversations now. I think the patients and what I call the consumers are more curious and working on self-education more than ever. And one thing that I get over and over again is that they just don't have access. So that's my goal today, is to bring access of you two brilliant scientists and physicians to our community. So I want to just back up for a second and start with each of you. Dr. Palacio, how did you get involved in long COVID? What was going on prior to that being a subject of concern and study?
Well, really, I think as for many of the researchers and scientists involved in this type of conditions, it's a personal journey. So before long COVID happened, my daughter had ME/CFS, and we had been through 10 years of trying to find answers without a lot of luck, with a lot of diagnoses and a lot of medications and a lot of hopelessness, especially because she was a teenager, until I met Nancy. And Nancy diagnosed her correctly and gave me hope. And we were in that space, getting my daughter better from ME/CFS when the pandemic happened. And obviously, I recognized, having learned from Nancy, that this was going to happen, that the COVID virus was going to lead us into this consequence of the pandemic, and that I couldn't bear to think of more people suffering what my daughter went through. So I decided to make a switch, and I started advocating to create a clinic in the VA, and the Miami VA was wonderful. Obviously, the Miami VA has experience with diseases like this, like all for illness. Right. So that's how I ended up creating the clinic, because my daughter taught me, Nancy taught me the importance of these, and the Miami VA were just really wonderful in allowing me to do that.
Hi, it's Haylie Pomroy, your host. Did you know that the world's largest single environmental health risk is air pollution? That's right. We are being bombarded by toxins every single day, because they are in the very air we breathe. But don't worry, there is hope. Whether you are dealing with fatigue, mast cell activation, an autoimmune disorder, long COVID, viral reactivation, inflammation, anxiety, or depression, all of it can feel overwhelming. I know firsthand what it feels like to fight to find real impactful solutions to your health struggles. I have been where you are. But one thing is crystal clear. We must address the environmental and toxic burden in our bodies. Let me help you do that. Go to HayliePomroy.com/detox and download my free Detox Decoded Masterclass. I will teach you nutrition and natural therapies to help your body eliminate toxins. Let's give you a fighting chance. I cannot wait to see you there.
Something that you said just hit me, and I know it's going to hit so many people that are listening right now. You're in the medical community. You're extremely successful, very well established, extremely connected, and you were struggling to get the help that you needed. I think that's going to be really validating for a lot of our listeners, because I think sometimes, people are made to feel dumb or less than or not knowledgeable or not connected or whatever. The list can go on. But I think the humility or you sharing that you had to reach out on behalf of your daughter's health and wellness. And I find myself in that same situation with the struggles and the health struggles that my daughter's going through right now. But that's cool. I did not know that about your story. I know that you guys came together and you're doing amazing and brilliant things, but I did not know that. And Dr. Klimas, what is it like when someone comes in with their kid, and I can say this because I do this to you, I'm sorry, but their kid is struggling and they've been through 10, 20 docs, wrong, incorrect diagnosis or lack of diagnosis. What is it like when someone walks in with that patient to you? Do you see it right away? Do you go, this is what it is? Or what's the process that you go through?
Every patient is different because every patient's had a different level of evaluation to begin with. They may come in with a whole lot of stuff done. But actually, it starts with the interview, the history, the usual doctor stuff that doctors do, but with, perhaps a filter that is listening for the common signs and symptoms of the illness. And honestly, you can see it in the parents' eyes. They're so frustrated. And the long COVID kids, oh my gosh, just as bad as any ME/CFS parent ever. They're so frustrated because they haven't gotten that kind of care. And I also say, in terms of Anna in particular, Anna brought something very special to the team that our team, as great as it is, had failed to do well, which is her tremendous interest in healthcare disparities. She made us stop, think, and look about whether or not we were really getting the whole flavor of the illness and able to make sure that we were learning from everyone that was affected. But also, when you do that, you also start thinking, well, are we actually able to roll out healthcare responses to everyone that needs it? And so that's really been great. And Anna, I really appreciate that about you, because if you look at the ME/CFS literature, almost all of the studies being done or have been done have been very biased towards a white middle class or upper class people that could access healthcare. And therefore, we don't have, with the exception of some population studies the CDC did and Lenny Jason did, we don't have very good data that crosses the whole spectrum. So this COVID-UPP study that we're doing, that the CDC is sponsoring, is very much focused on having a fair representative cohort. And we've succeeded. We have, 18% of the cohort's African-American, 55% speak Spanish at home. That's pretty impressive. That's a really different look than we've been able to achieve in our other studies.
So we have a variety of studies that go on all the time in our translational research, where we are taking basic biology or bench work, lab work, computational biology work, and we're bringing it directly to the patient. This currently, right now, this is one of those types of studies?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. This is an exciting study that we're doing that is doing something that I don't believe anyone else is really doing, which is comparing long COVID patients to ME/CFS. And the issue has been in that study that in ME/CFS, that it's awful hard to diagnose new ME/CFS since long COVID happened, because the case definitions overlap so much that it's hard to pick the the cases out. But we had this huge cohort that the CDC had done in an earlier study, 750 people, that had this assessment with phenotyping and everything done similar to what we're doing in this study. So we'll be able at the end of this study really to compare the two illnesses fairly and line them up. It's going to be good.
Hey guys, it's Haylie, your host. I wanted to bring to your attention the possibility of coming in and doing a study with us. It is called the COVID-UPP Study, and UP stands for Understanding the Post-Viral Phase. You have to be local in South Florida. There are 2 phases of this study. Let me give you the phone number. It's 305-275-5450. And the email is inimresearch@nova.edu. We are currently looking for patients that are dealing with post-COVID, long COVID. We have 2 phases of that study. Please contact us and see if this could be an opportunity for you to get the care and information that you need.
Hola, soy la doctora Ana Palacio, de la Universidad de Miami. Me encantó participar en el podcast de hoy y quería invitarlos a considerar el estudio COVID-UPP. Este estudio está tratando de determinar por qué las personas no mejoran después de COVID. Si les interesa saber más de este estudio, por favor llamen al número 305-275-5450 o pueden escribir al email inimresearch@nova.edu. Les agradezco mucho su interés y los vemos la próxima vez.
So I want to go back just a minute and define for everybody here exactly what I have 2 questions. One, can you give me some definition of what ME/CFS is? And then the other is, in the clinic and here, and I was actually speaking with a very significant advocate in the ME/CFS world the other day, and she said, "Oh, we saw it coming. We all saw it coming. We were studying this forever." I know that inside the institute we see that, but outside, help me understand what is chronic fatigue syndrome and what's the ME part of it? And then why is that so paralleled with long COVID? I'll let either one of you take the first one. What the heck is ME/CFS?
You want to grab that one, Anna?
No, go ahead. You are the expert.
I've got Dr. Mom and Dr. Mom and patient advocates that are gonna, yes. Okay.
I get to
Please.
be Dr. Grandma now. I used to be Anyway, yeah, so ME/CFS, that's a story, and I'll make it short. But chronic fatigue syndrome was the case definition that a group of clinicians came up with in the early 90s. That's what call it consensus case definition. It always means when you work in a group, you probably come up with the wrong darn thing because it's a terrible name for this illness, chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a lot more than fatigue. Meanwhile, our colleagues in England and in Europe didn't do that. And they instead dug out of their history books not too far back an illness called myalgic encephalomyelitis, which infers myalgic muscle pain, encephalo brain, myelitis brain and muscle inflammation. So,
Ooh, okay.
yeah. So it made more sense because
Yes.
it defines the illness as a brain disease, which was really important to do. And it inferred inflammation, which is definitely true. And it inferred inflammation above and below the neck, which is also very true. So that was a better name. So as a compromise in the United States, we put the cross.
We added them together.
CFS,
But I think that definition is really important because I think a lot of times, I'm older when we first heard of chronic fatigue syndrome, we thought people were really tired and they just needed rest. And if they just could get rest or reduce their stress, that it was more of a psychological aspect of overwhelmedness. I mean, it's been crazy, in my opinion, watching that evolve. I think it helps a lot of people out there be able to communicate to their loved ones, their families, their colleagues, that there is a systemic inflammatory response, like you said, from the tip of the brain to the bottom of the toes can be impacted and affected. And that, I think that's reducing it down, although I know it's tremendously complex, I think that really is going to help a lot of us communicate, just those that are dealing with it outwardly. And how help me bridge the leap, which feels very short, or maybe it's intertwined, between ME, CFS, and what we're now seeing with this post-pandemic long COVID.
I can take that one. ME/CFS is kind of a syndrome, no? Do you have patients, and patients are unique. They come in with certain common themes, but a lot of anything could be going wrong. Like in the case of my daughter, she had already a lot of diagnoses that were real, going autoimmune diseases, immunological diseases, etc. At the end of the day, this systemic response is responding to one or more triggers that have put the body in this state of hypervigilance, of hyperresponse, that eventually leads to exhaustion of your immune cells and kind of like tumbling your systems, your GI system, your respiratory system. And depending on the patient, if they present with more of one symptom versus another.
Can I stop you just a second? Because what you said was profound, in my opinion. And I took notes that there's a systemic response, and typically there can be one or more triggers, and that it results in an exhaustion in the immune system. And
yes.
And I just bulleting that for everybody out there. We're going to bullet that for you guys in an infographic. It's a systemic response. There's one or more triggers, and that there's an exhaustion of the immune system. So just the fact that we know that it impacts the immune system from a systemic perspective, I'm sorry, thank you. I just wanted to get that written down because I think that's going to be really important. So then what happens in that cascade, or what are we seeing?
So once you get your immune system exhausted, you have like a programming going on that you need to be hypervigilant, that your immune system needs to be on high alert, but that at the same time puts your body in kind of survival mode, meaning that your adrenaline system, your adrenergic system, your fight or flight system is activated. And that's something that we see in the ME/CFS and also in long COVID, that this perfect balance that we should have between our flight and fight and our rest and digest systems is kind of gone. And now we're kind of have big swings, and people feel all sort of symptoms, palpitations, and GI symptoms, problems controlling temperature, all sort of things. But if we think about that, this is the process that happens in ME/CFS, and it could be one or more triggers. The COVID virus is just a trigger. It's a very potent trigger. So the COVID virus is a very potent trigger. And we knew when people say we saw this coming, it's because if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, so many people ended up quickly in the ICU with what we call the cytokine storm, that,
yes,
that there were all this a big inflammatory response this inflammatory response, in fact, was the thing killing people. It was a massive response, and organs would shut down because the body was flooded with this systemic response. So and that was kind of like quick into the pandemic, a couple of months, and we were seeing the tragedies happening in the ICUs of not being able to rescue people from this huge systemic response. So once we see that, we can see that the COVID virus is a very potent trigger. And once, if somebody survives, it still will create these alarms. It will be so triggering, so immunogenic, that the body will try to defend itself.
So then we get the systemic response, and so the trigger can be, the COVID virus. What types of triggers do we see in ME/CFS? What types of things can be triggers?
Yeah, Nancy gave you a much comprehensive list. I can tell you from my experience, what happened to my daughter was that she probably had Epstein-Barr virus, but then she was an overachiever. So stress was a trigger. And the last piece was mold exposure.
Yes.
So mold was a really important trigger for her.
And some of those environmental illnesses and I've seen so many times, or we talk a lot about in our clinicals on Friday, we talk about that being kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back, but can those environmental toxins or mold toxins, can those also kind of confuse the immune system? Because sometimes we see where it's really hyper and sometimes we see it where it's really repressed, and when it's repressed, then the viruses get to go up. I mean, was that the case, or is it a triad where they're all equally important? The million-dollar question, Dr. Klimas, the million-dollar question.
Yeah, that's for Nancy.
Yeah, that's interesting because you really don't need all of those things. You just need one of them. But to get the more you have, obviously, the worse it is. And so think about this. When the acute infection happened, if it was Epstein-Barr or COVID or something, someone put the on button on the immune system, just turned it on, slammed your thumb on the on button without the off button, okay? Normally, you clear a bug and there's a system to shut it back off again. So if something happens that would allow the on button to continue to be pressed, then a whole bunch of bad things happen downstream of that. You exhaust the immune system, just chronic immune activation. Back in 1991, Jay Levy wrote a paper right behind ours where we were describing chronic immune activation. And he said we should call the illness chronic immune activation syndrome.
Wow.
I thought it was a great name. It was the perfect name. I was all about it. I couldn't get anyone else to go with it, but it was the best name.
But Dr. Klimas, so many people don't even think that this disease or this syndrome or long COVID even impacts the immune system.
That's the thing. I mean, they're horribly misinformed.
Horribly wrong. Yeah.
But the question you asked about mold was interesting because, yeah, can molds turn on the immune system? Absolutely. They're powerful antigens your immune system wants to respond. And if you're allergic, even more so. But they're also release toxins, things you inhale, things you breathe in, or if they're in your system, in your gut, then you absorb them, that are toxic, mitochondrial poisons that make cells not work very well. And so then your immune system not only is in the position that it can't turn itself off, it also can't clear the virus, okay? So if the function of the system has been impacted so that the virus now doesn't have anything looking for it to get rid of it. And the virus itself, it's the vicious cycle. The virus is immunologically active and driving the on button, and the immune system should respond by snagging the virus and pulling it out, but it can't, it's broken. So it just goes on and on and on, and that's that chronic activation pathway. Could other things matter? Yeah, they do. Allergens matter. Other infections matter. Second hits matter. Getting COVID repeatedly, that's not good for you.
It's crazy because I sit here and I listen to you and I get access to all of you gratefully. But I get frustrated sometimes when I'm listening to you because I know that there's so many people out there that don't have access, right? I mean, Dr. Palacio, you even said yourself, you went through with the connections and the medical degrees and all of that you have, that it's so difficult to get access. So we have unique ways where people can come into the fold with us and work on trials and research. There's one, people are going to watch this years from now. We are always having things that are happening, but there's one right now, given the time, that's called COVID-UPP. I'm going to give people a phone number. It's 305-275-5450, area code 305-275-5450. We have an individual that will answer that phone that is looking for, we're recruiting actively right now. Again, we're always recruiting for something, but this one's fascinating to me because it's part of the COVID-UPP study. And I want you to please tell me about that study. I also just got an email, which is INIM, like the Institute for Neuro-Immune Medicine, INIM research@nova.edu. So that's our email when individuals that are out there. I know that sometimes our studies, people can be remote. Sometimes people have to be here in South Florida with the clinic or in Davie or in Miami. Can you guys tell me about this particular study and that's going on right now and the kinds of studies that we do here?
COVID-UPP is a study that is sponsored by the CDC. It's happening in South Florida because we wanted to, as Nancy was saying before, get a very diverse population. So South Florida is a perfect place to understand the COVID-UPP from the diversity perspective. So we are recruiting people that got COVID at any point, and then we will ask some questions to try to see if they recovered or didn't recover. And the purpose of the study is to see what are the differences, what is the trajectory of the illness among people that recovered after having the infection and people that do not recover and develop long COVID. And
do they have to have any labs run or any blood draws, or is it just a questionnaire?
Just a questionnaire to see if
Okay.
they qualify for the study, and then they can participate in 2 stages of the study. The first stage is just understanding the trajectory of the symptoms. So all they need to do is answer some questionnaires that will be sent by email or text. So it's a remote participation where they just answer some questions that will let us understand how the disease is progressing over time, which is really important because we now have some clinical experience, those of us seeing clinically patients, but we need to do this in a very formal way to see if the disease gets always better, if the disease goes up and down, if the disease is getting worse. So the trajectory is very important. And then if they have a lot of impact in their life, if they are really not functioning at the level, they would qualify for the second stage of the study. That is a in-person part.
And what does that entail? They come into the clinic?
They come into a clinic, into the Davie or Kendall.
Okay, so either Miami, Kendall, or Davie. Okay.
Yes. And they will have kind of like a very comprehensive visit that will have all the blood work, and we will look for this immune exhaustion that Nancy was talking about. So we will do blood work to see how the immune system is working, and other tests like echocardiograms, EKG, breathing, kind of how the lungs are functioning, the smell, cognitive function test. So it's kind of a very comprehensive test to see what is happening in the body, what organs are affected, what is not working well. So that is kind of a phenotyping study that would allow us to understand and correlate the symptoms to the abnormalities that we see in the tests.
That's great. And I think that, watching when individuals do get to come into the clinic, the comprehensive nature of testing all of these labs. For me, I'm on the outside. I get to go, why are we not running all of these immune labs on individuals that are already struggling? And I'm so glad that we're doing it as part of this study. When patients come in and they've seen, 10, like I think it was Dr. Harris was saying, sometimes, takes 10 years and 20 doctors to get a right diagnosis. They're not even running labs when people are having these neurologic or immune or modulation issues or problems. And for me out here, it's just very frustrating. So patients that are out there right now, is there any kind of questionnaire, or is there anything that exists that a person could help identify if they feel like they have long COVID? Or is there a standard of questions that are now being adopted by physicians? I'm going to come in the other door of the clinic now. Are doctors being educated in how to identify a patient that could potentially have long COVID? I'm going to throw one last thing. Dr. Klimas, you said now it's hard to almost diagnose sometimes ME CFS patients because so many of them are being looped into the long COVID piece of it. And how, I'm going to ask 18 questions. I'm sorry, I don't get you guys very often. I'll start with the first. How would a patient know? They just never got over COVID. They never felt the same afterwards. How would a patient self-identify and communicate that? What are we seeing?
So that's actually kind of hard because a lot of people are sick with long COVID who have accepted their change in their illness, their function, the way they feel. As if, it's just normal aging or something. And they don't really identify that this all started with an acute infection. It's really interesting. And yet post-COVID, we know if you can't taste and smell right, that might have been COVID. We all sort of associate that. But that fuzzy thinking, not being able to remember things as clearly as you could, body aches and pains, energy, being able to have previously, gone out and hadn't done things that you used to do for fun. And now discovering that if you do it, you pay a terrible price and have to go to bed to rest, maybe lose a day or two, just having to lie down afterwards, just because you went out and played a
Did something fun.
It's
Yeah.
something we used to do all the time.
Went to the grocery
So-
store. Yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it can be, I think people also don't want to identify as ill.
Right.
On the other hand, if it's so profound that it's affected your ability to do your work and your job, and you're having trouble doing a full 8 hours of something that you needed to do just to get a paycheck, and that really, those people probably are getting in front of doctors, maybe not with this diagnosis, but they're seeking care and they're trying to find out what's wrong with them. So
We had some, oh, sorry. I was just going to tell you.
Like a spectrum, it's subtle,
Yeah.
it's mildly impacted to profoundly impacted. That does matter. And it's a relapse type of illness. So that's actually one of the most frustrating things. You think you're feeling better and then you slam down. And you think you're getting better and you slam. That's what people become hopeless, is when they think that they were getting better and then they get worse. And trying to figure out those patterns really helps us help them, because sometimes those are preventable relapses.
I always share with everybody in the community is journal your health. Like just tomorrow, if you feel like you're feeling amazing, journal your health, because we don't want to identify as sick, most of us, right? And we had somebody in our community wrote this, and it shook me really, but she said that she went in to talk to her physician, and the physician's response was, "You didn't die. Look, you didn't die. You were one of the lucky ones. You survived COVID." And she said, it kept her away for about 8 months. And then she just said, "Look, I don't want to just live that way. I'm when I do something, I pay for it the next day. I'm foggy. I can't focus and concentrate." She said it was suggested that she had menopause. That's why she was foggy and couldn't focus and concentrate. She's now, and she's, posts pretty actively in the community, talks about having labs and showing that her immune system is dysregulated and showing that her autonomic nervous system is dysregulated, tested positive, all of those kinds of things. But my gosh, luckily she didn't lose hope. We are losing people, genuinely losing people from this earth because they're losing hope when they're diagnosed with, we've seen it for years in the ME/CFS space, but we're seeing it in long COVID now, and that's concerning.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dr. Palacio, how do these kinds of studies and researches help educate? I want the doctors to be like, it's where we turn to for help, right? We're conditioned, even though a lot of us have become really good at Google Doc, Dr. Google, whatever we call it, right? Looking up stuff, cringe sometimes.
Roll our eyes a little bit to that, but I do.
Right, but it never happens for no reason. It happens because people are desperate right now for data. People are desperate and desperate to at least Google's not going to tell you it's all in your mind and you have menopause, right? At least it's going to give you some keywords that maybe something you can read. But the whole goal is to, when we turn to our practitioners, for them to be laser focused on you and also have the knowledge. So that's why I always feel like these trials are so important, because not only do we collect a lot of data, but we can then change education in our young doctors that are coming up and re-educate some of our physicians that had never been exposed to this. So many people had never been exposed to ME/CFS, but are having to be exposed in their practices to long COVID.
So yeah, that's a perfect example of how you advance science. The problem is that there is always a lag, and the ME/CFS community has been wrong for many years, because even though there was evidence, the doctors still not aware. The difference with the long COVID happened all at once to millions of people, and many people are at once developing the disease. So we see more attention at the NIH level, at the CDC level, the WHO.
Wow.
The problem is that the studies are happening like ours, COVID-UPP, and that will allow us to describe better how to recognize this condition. But the doctors in the practices that people are frequenting, they are not in tune with what's happening. They will learn about that in 5 years from now, and we need to care for people now.
Exactly.
So that is the problem, but there is some hope. Like, for example, the VA is obviously only available to veterans, but we did start a screening, just pilot screening, early in 2020, and we found what Nancy was describing, that when we ask, did you recover from COVID, people say yes, but when we ask a little questionnaire from the CDC that asks if you had fatigue and problems sleeping and GI problems and feeling tired after doing activity, people would answer yes to a lot of those questions. And then we realized, and we called them and said, tell me about this. And they basically describe, oh, but that started, a lot later. So
Right.
it's not like it happens immediately, because it's kind of like what we're describing. Your immune system starts getting tired and things start getting offline later. So they don't
Right.
make the connection. But based on this data that we did and other VAs were collecting, the VA started a screening process. So I think that is the answer. So, and we are screening. Basically, 5 VAs are now asking the questions, like if you have fatigue and these questions, problem sleeping, getting tired after physical or mental activity, etc. And what we're finding is that 6% of the people have long COVID. That's
Wow.
at the VA. So that is from millions of people that get this email, 6% have it, and they are directed to clinics. So at the end of the day, this data from the VA is making its way through to journals, and hopefully that will make medical schools that are sometimes affiliated, many times affiliated to VAs, to start paying attention. At least I know that I am trying to get my medical school to consider places where we could introduce ME/CFS and long COVID in the medical education from the beginning, like medical school to residency, fellowship, etc. So there are people there trying, but it takes a village, and this type of forums are very helpful.
Absolutely. And you said something about that it all hit at once. And I never even really thought about this, right? We've been studying ME/CFS for decades, and the trajectory of getting answers and looking at treatment and looking at better and more accurate ways to assess the patient has been an evolution over time. And with the pandemic, and there was a lot of debate on how to treat the acute COVID patient. But doctors had to treat the acute COVID patient, period. I mean, it was thrusted upon practitioners globally. Now it's being thrusted upon practitioners globally. But I will say that I'm grateful, being on the patient side of things and being out there in the community, that all of the work in the ME/CFS community has allowed us to almost leapfrog into some types of treatments and therapies. I know our community is going to have tons of questions after this. I would love to have you back on. One of the reasons why we are constantly doing cutting edge, on the forefront translational research is because we have this unique dynamic of research, of clinic, right? Being able to have care and treatment, seeing the patient in real time, and computational biology and all of this that we have in the Institute. It's a really unique environment. So I encourage people to participate in any of the trials, but specifically the COVID-UPP one. What's exciting to me is I see how fortunate people are that actually get to come into the clinic and get really good assessment, really good validation for what they're feeling. First and foremost, when you walk through the door, we believe you, right? There's never any in fact, we want to know more about you than you thought you knew about yourself, because every bit of it tells us. So I just want to give everybody the number one more time. If you're struggling with COVID, and this is not exclusive to veterans, correct? This is not VA exclusive. Okay.
No, the study.
Okay.
COVID-UPP?
I just wanted to make sure.
COVID-UPP is for everyone.
So
in
there's
the
two.
South Florida area.
So in South Florida, there's 2 phases, but also go to our website, you guys, at INIM, at the Institute for Neuro-Immune Medicine. We are constantly doing these incredible aspects of research, and we need patients for it. We need you and want to help you. So the phone number you can call directly is 305-275-5450. Please make sure that you are physically located in South Florida. And then the email, you can shoot them an email directly and talk to somebody. It's INIMresearch@nova.edu. Dr. Klimas and Dr. Palacio, I please come back. This is really important. I know that this one is going to get a lot of questions, and all of those patients, including your daughter out there that are fighting the fight and have fought the fight, that excellent care is the only kind of care that they're going to accept, and it's the only kind of care that's going to get people well again. My I appreciate you being candid and thoughtful and sharing and caring, and I appreciate her sharing her story too. And Dr. Klimas, always, our community is just over the moon that they can have access to you in this way. So I thank you so much. We'll keep the conversation going. We'll talk again soon. Thank you, guys.